Makina rā te kawa orongo kia pūrea nei ngā au o tāwiri mātea te au mai tāwiti nui tāwiti roa tāwiti pā māmau ki te kūreitanga o aku raukure I titia nei. E rongo waka iria kera tūturu waka maua kia tīna, uie tai kie. Ka tika me rerenga mihi manawa nui ki rātou. E noho ana I raro I te pauritanga. E tuku ngā roimata ki rātou kua mene atu ki te pō. E te wānau ngaia koutou, hoi anō huri no I te maunga ki ngā pare kawakawa o ngā ware, e mihi atu ana ki koutou katoa ngā iwi, e noho ana I raro I te pauritanga. Hoi anō ka wakawiti atu rā ki tātou te hunga ora, e mihi atu ana rā ki ngā tamariki o ngā rua hinerangi, o tira ngā wānau I tēnei wā, koe nei mātou ngā wanaunga me ngā piringa karangama e tuku ana I te aroha ki koutou e te wānau. Hoi anō anei tō tātou nei kaupapa I te pō nei. Me mihi ka tika ki koutou e wakarongo mai ana, e mātakitaki mai ana I tēnei wā. Ki tō reo iriragi Māori a te porimako o Taranaki tō Uetuki Manawa. Hoi anō ka tahuri atu rā ki roto I te reo Pākehā, kia mōhio atu koutou heaha tō tātou nei kaupapa kōrero. Nō reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Welcome everybody. This is our online discussion for tonight. Happy Sunday to everybody. We're just getting ourselves ready for this beautiful kaupapa kōrero in regards to actually something beautiful, which is being who we are. Takatāpui, our rainbow community. And I've got some amazing whānau, beautiful pillars within our local community that are doing amazing mahi. So I think first and foremost, I'll just tuku atu te rākau ki a koe whaia Leone, māue kōrero mai ko wai koe, no wai koe.
Tēnā koe nāne ko, tēnā koutou e te whānau e whakarongo mai, e mātakitaki mai ana I te pōnei. Tuatahi ake mihi atu ki a koe nāne ko nāu I whakatuwhera tō tātou hui, I rongi te karakia me ngā puropuro ake ki a rātou kua wehe ki te pō. Mihi tautoko ngā mihi hoki ki te whānau o tātou whanaunga no Ngāti Ruahine me ngā āhuatanga e pā atu I rongi. A rātou I tēnei wiki, ko te tino tūmanako ka pakiti ora I rongi te whānau nā tamariki mokopuna. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe. Hoki Glenn, ki a tātou katoa I huihui mai nei, tēnā tātou. Ko wai tēnei, tētahi mokopuna o te maunga titohia. E noho whakaiti ana I nui o koutou aroaro I te pōnei, no Taranaki iwi, no Te Atiawa, no Waikato, no te whānau Pihama, Manukonga, Butler hoki tēnei, no ngā hapu o Ngāti Rāhiri, Ngāti Mahanga, ngā mahanga taire. Anō reira, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, whaia mō kōrero, mai o hāna, mai ko wai koe, no wai koe o tira o mihi, hei tuku aroha ki te wānau e mātakitaki mai ana. Hoi anō, ka tahuri atu te kei o te waka ki tō tātou nei hoa, Glenn, mana nei e tuku mai, ko wai koe, no wai koe.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi, and thank you so much for having me in to Leone, kia ora, and to Nganiko, thank you for hosting the space for us. And yeah, I'm a child of Aotearoa. I always try to forget my whakapapa, but I'm connected from Otipoti, Dunedin, where I was born, through to Tamaki Makaurau, where I grew up, and yeah, throughout our beautiful motu. And so thank you so much for having myself and us here. And it is a pleasure to have a conversation that I think we need to have right now in Taranaki, in Aotearoa, but in this climate that's going on throughout our world. So kia ora.
So tell us a little bit about your mahi that you do, Glenn, so that everybody knows what you do.
So, apologies. Yeah, I'm a politician, so I'm a Labour Party MP based here in Taranaki, and obviously Wellington is the place where I spend a lot of time. Actually, recently I became the chief whip, which most people go, what even is that? But I'm the person who manages and organises our Labour Party caucus in Parliament. So it is my role. But really, I'm the spokesperson for tourism and hospitality, but also I'm a person who just wants to fight for our people. Those who know me, those who don't. I've been in the community sector, been fighting for people at the grassroots of community for my whole life. And I live in Mawhel, in Ngamotu. And really for me, it's around how do I take the challenges, the opportunities, the possibilities of our whānau in Mawhel, how do I take that to Parliament to fight? But also I'm a Rainbow MP, so I'm part of the Labour Rainbow Caucus. And so over the last month, actually, through March, have been everywhere from Auckland to Wellington to Taranaki, to Christchurch, Dunedin, have been around actually celebrating and championing the rainbow cause, because it's more important than ever right now.
Thank you for that, and I really appreciate everything that you do for us. And you're always vocal, and you're attending a lot of kaupapa. So I get to see you all the time, and we have good talks throughout. Yeah, I've known you a long time, Ewa, so it's good to see that you're taking our reo into Parliament and speaking on important things. Hoi anō ka tahuri atu rā ki a koe whaia. Kōrero mai heha o mahi, heha o pukenga, hoi anō heha tētahi tino kaupapa, o ētahi o tino kaupapa.
Kia ora no tātou. So I am, Graham Smith would call the work we do being activist scholars. So I work in kaupapa Māori theory, research and practice. I am a director of research at Tūtama Wahine o Taranaki in Waitara. I've been working alongside Ngā Rope and the whānau there off and on from around the motu since the early 2000s in a research capacity. I've worked at a number of universities, the University of Auckland and the University of Waikato, and in terms of my job, and recently moved home here to Waitara and have committed to doing this mahi within iwi Māori liberatory kind of community context. And so currently with Tūtama Wahine o Taranaki, we're looking at, revisiting 40 years of kaupapa Māori developments and initiatives across the motu. And that's with Linda and Graham Smith, Margie Hoipa, Jenny Lee Morgan and Matt Roskridge, amongst others, and developing ideas around te tahi kaupapa te kāhui rangahau no Taranaki, so looking at a Taranaki network of researchers with Tūtama Wahine and in partnership with a taumata, which is Will Edwards and Mihi Rachima. So those are two big pieces of work we're doing at the moment. So my background really is in kaupapa Māori education and research and theory, and working in ways that disrupt the kind of current colonial systems and seeking to transform kaupapa. I have 6 tamariki and 6 mokopuna, and they really have driven pretty much everything that I've done in my life, alongside having been raised in a big whānau here in Waitara on the Peka Peka block, knowing what has happened here for our people, knowing the resistance that's had to occur and the ongoing dispossession of things, of our land, of our waters, of our reo, of our tikanga, that disconnection. So really that's my mahi. My mahi is around reconnection. I'm takatāpui, and so what's been happening not just in the past few months, for a very long time, but which has escalated in the past few months, have become a concern. And we did a big piece of research that I can talk a little bit about later on, around the impact of homophobia and the impact of hatred and the impact of transphobia on our people, on our whānau members who are takatāpui.
So I really wanted to have a little kōrero in regards to takatāpui, Whai Leone. Give us your understanding of what takatāpui means to you, and what e hae tahi kōrero e hāngai atu nei ki te kupu takatāpui ki a koe.
Well, the term takatāpui to kind of express Māori sexuality in terms of LGBTQI plus communities, so lesbian, gay, transgender, intersex, queer, bisexual communities, takatāpui is a term that we've used politically as a way of speaking to being a part of those communities in terms of how we identify our sexuality. It aligns to he whakaaro Māori. It's a term that was used in relation to the kōrero around tūtānekai and hine moa, and particularly a kōrero within that story around tūtānekai having tētahi hoa takatāpui, he mea tāne. And so ngā hui te awa kōtuku was one of the earlier scholars and manawahine, toa manawahine, that drew on that term as a way of having a kaupapa term, a tikanga term, kupu Māori, that could be utilised to speak to sexuality, particular kinds of sexuality for our people. The Williams Dictionary, going right back, defines the term as an intimate friend of the same sex. And so in that context, it is about intimacy, male to male, female to female, diverse gender sexualities. But it also, for me, that definition also means that there can be intimacies between people of the same sex, the same biology, that are not necessarily sexual. Intimacy operates on multiple levels, but it's very much a political term for gathering momentum. People say, well, we didn't have a term for gay, or we didn't have a term for lesbian. There are various ways that we've coined terms for Māori lesbian women. Very early on, there was a term wahine mō ngā wahine, wahine moi wahine, for gay men, tāne moi tāne. And so there's a whole series of terms that people have utilised to politically speak to sexuality in that way. But, I also hear people say, well, there isn't a term, a specific kupu or ingoa for gay or for lesbian or for transgender or for bisexual. And that's true within Te Reo Māori, but we didn't require one. We have to understand that prior to colonisation, sexuality was not the defining factor of our identity. It was a part of our identity, but we didn't require a term specifically for that, because we identified through our pepeha, through our whakapapa kōrero, and who we had intimate relationships with was not of consequence for our people. It was not a big deal. And equally, we also don't have a term for heterosexual. So it's not just that we don't have a specific term for gay or lesbian or transgender, but we also don't have a term for heterosexual. So what does that tell us? Sexuality was not the defining factor. We didn't require a name for a particular kind of sexuality. You were in relationship with whoever you were in relationship with was. And so, there are a whole range of us thinking about this, and that whakapapa And whakapapa kōrero has always been the way in which we've understood our relationships to each other. So, yeah, I mean, takatāpui for me is a term that I do utilise because, the Western terms often have a lot of other cultural understandings that come with them. And so it enables me to think about, when I think about sexuality, I think about that in the context of being Māori, in the context of whakapapa, in the context of being relational, of whanaungatanga, all of those things, of manaakitanga. So it is very much within that context.
Nā reira, ki o nei o kāro, he taonga te tinana, he taonga te hanga o te tangata, me tōna wakapapa. And so when we look at takatāpuhi and the kupu takatāpuhi, but also, embracing our identity isn't just subjected to moi tāne, moi wahine rānei. It's actually wakapapa. So kia ora mō wakamāramatanga whaia. Hoi anō, I've got a question for you, Glenn. So we're talking about identity, so how important is it for our rainbow community to embrace our identity?
It's one of those moments where it seems more important than ever, it often, in the Pākehā world, people often talk about, why do you need this label? Why do you need to have LGBTIQ plus A, etc.? But actually, it is a point in time in history where we actually need to embrace those labels. And I wish we didn't have to. I wish we could just be who we are and live who we are. But actually, often naming who we are actually is powerful and is political. And that is where we're at. I look at what's going on in the United States. I look at what's going on here in Aotearoa, and it's more important than ever for us to actually stand up, to name who we are, and to be bold in that. An example, I've just come from Tāmaki this weekend. It was actually at a Christian traditional rainbow event. And very much it was about how do we explore and understand who we are, because we are the colonizers, right? So the people that were there was Māori, there was Pacifica, there was others, but the vast majority were actually Pākehā who were in that space and negotiating and trying to understand what it is to be rainbow, what it is to be to have culture in the room, but also what does it mean in a Christian and in a cultural context of that, and that is the challenge, I believe, and for us it's been frustrating because I thought 18 months ago, a year ago, that we were progressing and we were good, we're moving forward, that being in the takatāpui, being rainbow, being, whatever you identify as, we were actually in a space that was 2024, 2025, and the world was moving forward. But you look at what's going on right now, not only here in Aotearoa and our politics and our communities, but around the Western world, which is majority white, and you see people retreating, and I don't know if it's fear, I don't know if it's ideology. I'm often unsure whether it's just the terrible game of politics where people are retrenching into their spaces and challenging what it is for us to be a rainbow whānau. And that is hard to see, to experience, and for Leonie and for myself, people have been in this space for a long time. It's, we're making progress moving forward. And an example is that last month was 40 years since homosexual law reform was first read in the House. So the first reading of the homosexual law reform bill, 40 years ago. And you look at that moment in time from the first reading to the third reading when it became law in 1986, and it was progression. You look at the work that was done around human rights in the 1990s and around inclusion of our rainbow whānau, and its progress. You look at the early 2000s and the way we move forward in terms of civil unions, and then in the 2010s marriage equality, and we think, man, we've got there, we're here. But then you look at what's going on right now, and it feels like we're moving backwards into our corners, into our trenches, and it's not easy, and it's hard, and that's a challenge, I think, for us as a community here in Taranaki, but for us around the country, is how do we actually be open, to be aware, and to fight to ensure that identity is acknowledged, but more importantly, is actually celebrated.
You talked a lot about, ensuring that we are progressing in since 1986. These are significant times for us, and we've been leading and setting precedences globally, even having marriages in Parliament themselves. But I really want to touch on something that I think that Whai Leone will be able to answer, and it's just in regards to something that you have mentioned in regards to colonisation. So Whai, talk to us about how detrimental has it been when it comes to colonisation, as well as progressing towards gender and sexuality. Has colonisation interrupted, or has it benefited from this?
Well, colonisation has interrupted every aspect of our lives and of our ways of living. And, in terms of the Mana Wahine claim, that there's huge amounts of discussion and evidence that, Māori women have been incredibly suppressed in our capacity to articulate ourselves, to be in critical positions, to be a part of decision-making, and to be a part of leadership, that the denial of mana in that context has had severe impacts and destructive impacts in terms of not only Māori women, but in terms of whānau hapu and iwi itself, with that kind of denial. Alongside that, equally, is the whole way in which colonial, and it is, I agree with Glenn, it is ideological. It's ideological, and it plays itself out within the social way in which we do things. And so gendered colonial understandings of women as chattels, women as ownership, of sexuality being only within a heterosexual norm, or being what they call heteronormative, that is the only way in which you have relationships, and that's been grounded in a colonial, in a colonial belief system and practice of ensuring that the nuclear family unit is the dominant unit within a country, and a nuclear family unit looks like a heterosexual couple with, in Parker's statistical terms, 2.4 children. I'm not sure how you get the 0.4, but I think that it kind of shows how ridiculous this whole understanding is. So, we have been impacted by all of those belief systems around gender, by all of those belief systems around sexuality, and then we've added to that the belief systems around race and ethnicity and being Indigenous people. So, there's all these things that intersect together when we're talking about takatāpui within whānau Māori, but they're also very present when we're talking about the wider LGBTQIA plus community in terms of how people talk about sexuality. So we are constantly combating colonial belief systems, and we have many examples of the way in which that also interrupts our thinking. So on one hand, you can be quite radical thinking around tino rangatiratanga, but very, very conservative thinking around sexuality and around takatāpui and rainbow. So you can, we have many examples of often within our own community, people articulating views that are very oppressive in terms of sexuality, without them even considering that they would not accept that in terms of being Māori. So colonisation fragments our thinking. It pits us against each other. It destroys and disconnects us. And so we end up with these kind of layers of oppression, and we're constantly, it's like peeling back an onion, right? You're constantly peeling back, and then there's another layer, and there's another layer. And I think, what Glenn was saying around it being 40 years since the first reading of the homosexual law reform, which I actually recall very vividly in 1985. And I recall it because I had just moved to Auckland to go to the University of Auckland after leaving Waitara and then living in the Manawatu for a few years, and then moving to Tāmaki to go to university. And I walked, in my view, right into that. And at that time was really coming to terms with my own sexuality and my own understanding of what that meant. And that was a very violent time. We should not forget that time around homosexual law reform, there was a lot of violence of the like that we're seeing now. Destiny Church may not have been there then, but there was a lot of other organisations that were leading the kind of homophobic violence, both physical and psychological violence and emotional violence against communities. And so, that's a relatively recent memory. And I look now, and I was relatively young then, comparatively. And so I look now and I think, okay, this is happening now. How the young people who were of the age I was, mid-20s at that time, how are they feeling now? How are young, rainbow people, young takatāpui people feeling when they come up against this now? Because I remember that as a young person, and the impact of that as a young person, and the fear of coming out. And yet, many of us put our names on ads in the newspaper, and then people became targets, direct targets. Individuals became targets, but it was a social movement. So, that's what colonisation does, and that's what colonisation is continuing to do. The belief systems that are being put now, that are under some guise of Christian values, which are not Christian values. They do not reflect Christian values. They do not reflect compassion. They do not reflect care. They do not reflect love. They do not reflect humility. They do not reflect any of those fundamental Christian values. And 40 years ago, the same thing was happening. So that is the impact. I mean, we could talk about this, just the impact of colonial belief systems, for a very long time. And actually, in many ways, as takatāpui and as rainbow communities, we've been constantly trying to mitigate this stuff, for a very long time. And the fact that in Tāmaki, in Tāmaki Makaurau, which by its virtue of its name is about a place of beauty, and in 85, I also walked into a community of Ngāti Whātua, of Sharon Hawke and her whānau, who were very strongly committed to ensuring the passage of homosexual law reform. And so, in that place that you can have Destiny Church, be so violent to a community that has done them no harm, that has shown them no harm, that is celebrating a sense of pride, because what we learnt from the beginnings of the Pride movement was that the only people who would celebrate us, first and foremost, was ourselves. The only people who would uplift us, first and foremost, would be ourselves. And for Māori, you know, whānau, because we are whānau, and we are hapu, and we are iwi. And so there is a real call, in my view, for all hapu, all whānau, all iwi, not only within Taranaki, but around the motu, to actually stand up and say, this is actually not okay. It's not okay that you treat our relations like this. It's not okay that you can treat our communities like this. It's not okay that under some false sense of the Bible, you can impose violent actions in our communities.
It just going through your kōrero, Whae Leone, you had mentioned how difficult it was, you know, that everything was advertised, and that you were publicly announced, whether you liked it or not, and that sense of, you know, your mana was diminished. I don't know. I personally don't know. The question was, is that how does my generation deal with such things, you know, today? And I remember, and I just want to mihi out to Connor. I can see you, Connor. Connor did an amazing kōrero a couple of weeks ago, and it was during Matatini, and talked about, you know, safe spaces. And this was just on the, I suppose, after what had happened at Te Atatu. Those of you who may or may not know, Te Atatu had an amazing rainbow event, and they were met with violence. And it's sad to see that a lot of whānau are, and I know because they're watching, are afraid of coming out because of this mannerism. So I want to turn to you, Glenn, in regards to apartheid, and I think it's relevant and current for us at the moment. In Parliament, as you advocate for not just those supporters of Labour, but Labour has a rich history with our LGBTQ whānau, our rainbow whānau, our takatāpui whānau. So what does it mean to you to be present in Parliament as yourself, but also a representative for the rainbow community?
I mean, it's a heavy privilege to be in that space. It's a heavy privilege to stand in 2025 and to look at where we've come from, and to know our history, and in terms of all of those, excuse my language, but the wins that we've made in terms of homosexual law reform, in terms of marriage equality, in terms of, you know, the ending of conversion practices. It's always been a Labour government that has done that. So I acknowledge that, and so it is a privilege, but it's heavy and it weighs upon you. And I want to pick up on what Leone was just talking about in terms of what was going on in recent times in Ngāne Ko, what you just said about in Te Atatu and the, you know, and Destiny Church. And what actually offends me currently is that mainstream Christianity is nowhere to be seen in this. And I know that they're grappling with what it is to be inclusive. I know what they're grappling with, what it is to welcome us into their spaces. But when it's about violence, when it's about hate, it's really clear if the mainstream churches actually live the gospel, which is the story of Jesus, he condemns hate. He condemns, you know, he's passive. And it upsets me that the mainstream church has not come out to condemn what Destiny is doing, to condemn what Family First is doing around what they are inflicting and taking to our takatāpui, to our rainbow communities, and that's really hard. But as a Labour rainbow MP, it's always about how do we look forward, and I guess that's the thing. It's around, we're here right now, we're in the space where that people are retreating, where for some reason people are grasping at I mean, in part of me, and to be really cynical as a politician, it's all about numbers, right? As politics is a numbers game. It's about counting. And so you look at what's going on in America, you look at what's going on here in New Zealand now, it's all a numbers game. So what are the communities we can actually capture and grasp? And as I listen to Leonie, as I look at where we are now, it's really about how political parties, how niche parties can actually find their numbers to be relevant in 2025. And it seems absurd that our rainbow community is I don't even know what the word is, but is fodder for that. You know, that the rainbow community is actually an easy target to be used and to be counted. And as a Labour Member of Parliament, for us, it's how do we lift ourselves beyond that? How do we actually be to look at who we are, to look at our history, to look where we've come from, but actually now to actually fight and say this actually isn't okay. And this weekend is a really classic example. So many people know that what's been going on in the Green Party and Benjamin Doyle and the challenge that's been put to them and to their party. And on Wednesday, I was in Wellington in Parliament, and the head of parliamentary security arrived in my office and was quite flustered and quite anxious and said, you cannot, and Benjamin Doyle was going to be part of a panel we had on Saturday in Auckland as part of this Rainbow Conference. And it was myself, it was Benjamin and a couple of other members of Parliament. And parliamentary security was, you cannot do this. This is actually dangerous. We have intel that says the hate that people are actually out there to actually step up, and not just Destiny, but others who are actually there to step in and actually be violent. And I find that so strange and so foreign, being someone who has, I think over the last decade has felt so affirmed in marriage equality and the ending of conversion practices and even the repeal. I think it was the national government back in 2016, I think it was, or 17, when they actually passed legislation to expunge convictions of gay men who had been convicted of homosexuality before law reform had come through. And so, you know, you're in these moments where it's like, oh, we're here, we're going forward. And then suddenly you've got the head of security in Parliament in your office saying you cannot attend this event because it is dangerous and your safety is at risk. So for me, it's about how do I hold the line as a politician, as a human, as a member of our Rainbow whānau, but also how do we actually challenge the structures and look to a way forward where. I mean, I'm not sure people actually watch the. I haven't seen it yet, but I've read a lot about Adolescence, which is the Netflix series around the challenges of social media around young people and around people like Andrew Tate, or people moving back into the spaces of masculinity, moving back into the spaces of what binary actually is, where I know we have moved forward, and we're actually in a place where inclusion and where diversity and when the binary is actually finally being challenged. But I feel like in looking and listening over recent months and over the last probably 18 months is you think of when you're hanging on for dear life and you're holding your grip really tightly. And when you start losing your grip, the last thing you do before you fall is you squeeze really tightly to hold on. And I wonder and question, and I'm curious on responses, from us today, is we're in the place where, the patriarchy, the masculinity is actually in their last gasps. And so this is the last fight, which is actually messy and it's really dirty. But how do we, as Rainbow whānau, how do we as a community actually be gracious, be bold, but also fight to make sure that our people aren't hurt anymore, because we've been hurt enough already.
And Parliament is Parliament is a very Pākehā and heteronormative system in space, and I think that I want to just give the baton over to Whaia to comment in regards to the same kōrero, because I guarantee you there's some gold there that I want to hear from Whaia, but more in regards to the current situations that are happening in Parliament. Kōrero mai Whaia, or kōrero whakaro?
I mean, I want to begin with saying, you know, what is happening with Benjamin is appalling. It is violent, it is appalling, it is destructive, it is oppressive, it is demeaning. And anyone that knows him, anyone that knows Benjamin, you know, knows a person that is incredibly generous and caring and committed to the mahi. And so I just want to initially acknowledge that, and just to say to Benjamin, you know, you are an incredible person. You do not deserve what is happening to you. And, you know, your takatāpui community are behind you, and we are with you. And the whole kind of, you know, I agree with Glenn, this whole game playing that's happening with, particularly through New Zealand First and Winston's appalling way in which he took something, totally decontextualized it in order to actively seek to destroy somebody, you know, really has to be called into question and challenged. And I know that, you know, from whānau that have been in that space, including, you know, Glenn being in that space and others, and those who have taken really incredible leads in that parliamentary space, like Georgina Bayer, like Lewis Wall, and others before them, they really have carried something inside the house for takatāpui and for rainbow communities, and for making legislative change that really has been about justice, around changing what Moana J has called a system of injustice. And so from homosexual law reform through to the Civil Union Bill, through to the Marriage Equality Bill, and, you know, all of those, the removing of conversion theory or conversion practices, you know, all of that, they are about trying to level out injustices. They don't even begin to actually be about celebrating us. They're about trying to deal with past colonial injustices that have been imposed on you know, our communities for many, many years. And so, you know, we do understand that to be a space that is often very toxic, a space where, as we see with the Māori Party and the experience of our whanaunga at the moment around, you know, the activating of haka as a symbol, a tohu of ours, a taonga of ours, to show our discontent in a system of injustice, you know, and the impact of that on our people. We see the toxic nature of that space. And why is it toxic? Well, because it's colonial. And most colonial spaces are toxic. I mean, end of story. And yet people, you know, parties, individuals are constantly trying to articulate notions of justice in that space, which has really been built on a foundation of colonial injustice, of dispossession, of the murder of our people, the taking of our land, or, you know, so it is not surprising that we see this continue, and that it goes really unabated because parliamentary privilege enables certain people to say certain things that are hateful and that drive hatred. I think what people are failing to see or even to have any care for is that kind of venom and vitriolic hatred that is spread by particular parties, and in particular New Zealand First, and supported by its inaction of the National Party coalition as a whole, and by groups like Destiny Church, is the harm that is caused, the deep harm that is caused to takatāpui and to Rainbow community members through these actions, through these ways of speaking. And the research we did honouring the Honour Project Aotearoa that we did around the well-being of takatāpui in Aotearoa showed us a number of very clear things when this kind of hatred happens. So in that survey, over 75% said that they are constantly on guard. Constantly on guard. Now that has definitely escalated, in my view, in the past year with what is happening, with the backward movements that have been happening. Over 70% feel a fear of either being attacked or bullied. Okay. Over 60% talked about the harm that's caused by having no visibility, no role models. This is why it's important for takatāpui who are able to stand clearly in their whole selves publicly to do that. So in the homosexual law reform, it wasn't that our names were outed. There was a progressive campaign for takatāpui, for Rainbow, LGBTQI people to put their names to an ad against homosexual law reform, to actually fundamentally come out yourselves, to be visible. And that was very difficult for many people, but those who could do it did it because of the necessity of being visible, which is a little bit different to the groups now that's trying to out people who are not ready, who are not, don't feel confident in themselves to be publicly out there. And that, that's a consequence of experiences that we've had, of fear of being bullied, of fear of being attacked. 68% of those in the survey talked about that, they find it really distressing that many of their whānau and their friends won't discuss their sexuality. So that's all connected. Over half of those that were parents talked about the discrimination that they felt as parents and gave really clear examples of that discrimination. Because evidently, being a lesbian mother is somehow an oxymoron in morons' eyes, So it's that these are the things. This is the harm. Over 75% of our people said they felt extremely or very distressed because of issues of racism, homophobia, or transphobia. So these are the real effects. These are real lived effects of what is happening for people to experience this. And what happened in Tāmaki Makaurau, both in Te Atatu and in the Pride Parade, are examples of a particular group of people using acts of violence and trying to do that through a cultural template of haka, which is not designed to impose violence on whānau members. And, in an event which has its origins in resistance. So the Pride Parade, so it was around 1992. I think my oldest children were 1 when they went on their first Pride Parade. So, we've been in it since the beginning, me and my kids. And so, when we go back to that, and where did that come from? That came from, 1968 and the Stonewall, what they called the Stonewall riots, which were really acts of resistance against police brutality in New York. And so there were acts of resistance over a period of time in 1969. which then became a commemoration in 1970, and that began the Pride Parade. That became a commemoration and a celebration of we haven't gone away, we're still here. And so, you know, when Glenn talks about all of the many changes that we have seen in our lifetime, the ways of the power and the strength of those people who led those changes in our lifetime, you know, and we do really need to shout out to people like Lewis Award, you know, who got bills pulled out of the ballot that people thought would never be pulled. You know, he tohu tērā, they both came out and they both went through, you know, and the incredible impact on her and other people's lives in pushing that forward. So Pride Parades are about, and Pride Weeks, wherever they are about a way of celebrating that resistance, a way of celebrating progressive change, around celebrating not only takatāpui and rainbow individuals, rainbow communities, but also our whānau and our communities that support. And that is a very powerful, positive act. And so if Destiny Church think that they can manipulate our haka as a cultural practice, as a form of violence, when in actual fact that church has no commitment to anything Māori and actually demeans things Māori constantly. If they think that that is going to make people capitulate and bow down and stop being who we are, well, they need to think again.
You mentioned via that it was 70%, I believe, 70% of whānau that are living, well, that are in fear of coming out or feel unsafe in general. So I really want to just talk about that before I give the baton over to our listeners and our viewers that got pātai. So, Glenn, when it comes to our government agencies, what do you feel that they should be focusing on, or is there some improvements there that could happen? Like, how akaro e hangai atu ki tērā e hoa?
There's diversity and inclusion plans in place. But often it seems like, and you look at what's going on right now, that they're just box ticking exercises to be, yeah, we've ticked the box. You know, for some people listening or watching, they might have heard of the rainbow tick. It's in many ways, I'm always dubious and cautious about it because it's around, yeah, this company or this organization or this government agency, we're inclusive. The tick or the expression of that, and that's something I'm always acutely aware of, and actually always quite suspicious of, in terms of if you need to actually have your rainbow tick or have to you know, put out your diversity plan to the public. I kind of wonder, is that just messaging and you know going across it and actually, what is the lived reality for your rainbow people? And I've had the real privilege over the last month of being around the country for Pride events. So during February, and I was in Auckland and Christchurch and Wellington, you know, in the last month, attending multiple events. And it's been really interesting to meet people where they're at, and some in government agencies, some in the corporate field. And just to listen and understand what is going on right now in terms of their feeling of inclusion, their feeling of acceptance, their feeling of actually being part of the whānau of the organisation they're part of. And as I've listened, you know, for some it's actually been really positive. And I've heard, yeah, our organisation actually truly is inclusive and is doing everything they can. And actually at the point of where they actually don't even understand, but they're asking the right questions lean in and to actually to find their way to move forward, to actually to be fully inclusive, to the space where others are, they've done a they've done a survey, they've done a checklist, but actually we don't actually feel that we can actually safely be open in our space. And I think that a rainbow lanyard isn't actually enough. And I spend a lot of time in Wellington these days, and so often you see people walking down Lambton Quay and around Parliament with their rainbow lanyards on, but I question it, because it's often you wonder if it's just window dressing of something actually that isn't a reality. And so for me, being a politician, being in those spaces, I try my best to turn up, to ask questions, and to say, are we in 2025 and actually being in a space where we are inclusive, moving forward and welcoming everybody? Because whether it's around your pronouns, whether it's around your gender identity, whether it's around who you love, it's complicated, but it's not. Because I remember really clearly with Benjamin Doyle with their maiden speech, and I just did it right then, getting my pronouns wrong. And Benjamin was really clear, said, if you don't get it, just use my name. That's as easy as it is, So for us, I think it's be not afraid of leaning in and being open, because what harm does it do to you, to your organization, if you actually lean in and actually want to understand and learn and get my pronouns right, get my expression right, get my name right? It's actually, it does you no harm, but it enriches myself and actually enriches my ability to work and support the mahi that's being done. So it's exciting, but it's challenging as well.
Did you want to add anything to that, Whaia Leone?
No, I can see there's a couple of pātai, so do you want to do those?
Yeah. Ka pai. So we've got our first pātai. It's from John. He's talking about, well, actually, ko te āhua o hunu hui ono, looking at the influence of karaitiana on our identity as Māori, takatāpui. How does the te okorokohanga o te ao contribute to our identity as takatāpui, Whaia Leone?
Yeah, I mean, it does entirely. The karaitiana bit, I don't think we should be taking that pathway in terms of any of our aspects of our identity as Māori o takatāpui. In terms of te orokohanga o te ao, ko te whakapapa te mea nui, and so within our whakapapa are those identity ways of being. John goes on the next one to talk about exactly the pronoun kōrero around ia. Within te ao Māori, we have a singular pronoun for all that is inclusive of all. And so, in terms of the English pronouns, in the way in which they frame us, it's that English is very binary anyway. And so that I think that's part of when you mistakenly use pronouns. That's because of the binary nature that we've been raised in a colonial nature of utilising particular pronouns. But within te ao Māori and many other Indigenous languages, there is a singular pronoun for all, for mo te katoa. So then it takes away this kind of binary notion. It's not necessarily genderless, but it is about the multiple diverse genders in any way that we wish to identify ourselves. And so, and I think there is a difference between the way in which we use English pronouns in a context of when it is done deliberately as a demeaning feature, which we are seeing more and more, where people are denying the use, people's choices around what pronouns they want to have to refer to themselves. And when others in power use that as a way of demeaning, that is totally different. There's a totally different context. That is grounded in homophobia and misogyny on the whole. Kia ora, John.
He pātai anō, tēnā koe John, mō tērā pātai. We've got Gareth, me tōna pātai. What are the best tips for countering misinformation?
I'll give it to Glenn first.
I guess, you know, when we talk about misinformation, countering misinformation, it's, is it misinformation or is it disinformation or is it just downright meanness and, you know, trying to create smoke and mirrors to undermine the rainbow whānau? And I think that's often the case. You know, you look at misinformation and, yeah, Leonie's talked about New Zealand First and the fact that it's you know, the war on woke, right? What does that even mean? Do your research. Look at what woke actually means, and if you actually look at the history of what woke is, it's actually a really beautiful space that comes from North America in terms of challenging the status quo and the you know, the colonizers in so many ways. So I think it's in terms of countering misinformation, it's educate yourself. So what is the language that's going on? What are the I guess what is the intent of what people are trying to attack? And then how do you actually actually educate yourself to actually understand, to be able to then lean in. And my thing always is to not just not be in just for the fight, but to be curious, because I often think being curious and challenging the people who are peddling misinformation is to be curious and say, oh, tell me more. I want to understand what you actually mean. Because I often think that's a way when you actually can actually disarm some of that and actually find a way forward where you can actually maybe educate some of those people who are peddling misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And he pātai pai tērā, Gareth. Because I think one of the things is that we're constantly bombarded with misinformation, with disinformation, and with lies. And so I think in this context, generally, we're being bombarded with a lot of lies. And so anything that really brings up this whole way of creating hatred and harm to another community, people need to investigate that more deeply. People need to think more deeply. I think we have a lot of issues in terms of not only social media, but someone described to me the other day what's happening in America and he whanaunga no taranaki, and said to me, you know, what I see here is that they lie, and then they just go and do what they want.
Yeah.
Because the lies enable it. And we see that as a growing act here in terms of, even in terms of how Destiny Church like to peddle what they believe is what the Bible says. But they're very selective in the parts of the Bible that they take, and they leave other parts out that actually would show how ridiculous they are and what they promulgate. But also they lie. And so that's not just misinformation or disinformation. That's a deliberate, intentional practice of doing harm. So I think that, you know, and including those that are within this church, they're often very vulnerable and very easily manipulated because they're in certain contexts. You know, if you're in a group of people that are, you know, articulating hate and violence against another group of people, you need to just stop and ask what really is underpinning this. Where does this really come from? Because it doesn't come from any truth. And I think the reason why I think this is a good question is because I think it's a question we haven't really been able to find a good strategy to deal with. We have a lot more acknowledgement of misinformation, disinformation, and dishonesty and lies and just outright oppressive ways of being. And I think that we do, across our kind of activist spaces, need to think, how do we strategize more actively against it. And things like, you know, Glenn just giving a clearer definition of where the word woke comes from. It's like, you know, even people I know, you know, will often say, oh, that's PC. And I'm like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Because even the word politically correct has been manipulated and changed to be something. It's actually okay to be politically correct. It's okay to correct an unjust political system. That should not be used as a way of demeaning people. It is okay, and actually it is preferred that we are conscious and critical and reflective and can think through issues. We still might come to a different answer than each other, but at least we've done the time to be reflective. Yeah. So to be woke is actually to be conscious, is to be aware. There is nothing demeaning about that. In fact, that is an incredible characteristic and āhuatanga to have in your life. And so I do think we need to do some strategies across a whole range of activist communities around how we put out a different way of thinking about these things, so that the dominant way that we're dealing with, which is a white supremacist, conservative, colonial understanding, can no longer take hold. And that we don't end up saying it ourselves as if it has some validity. It doesn't.
Nui ngā wakautu I tuku mai e kōrua I roto I te haora nei. E hāngai ana ki ēnei kaupapa kōrero, ko te kaupapa kōrero. Hoi anō kia wakaputa ki te maria me a ngā whakamua tātou I raro I te rangi Māori. Hoi anō I raro I ngā āhuatanga kia whakāko ki tātou katoa mea ha kia anga mua pai. So I just wanna say thank you both for sharing your kōrero, for sharing your love, and sharing space here on Te Korimako o Taranaki. I know that our community definitely needed a kōrero like this, and we need more of it. We need to celebrate. We need to fill up spaces and places, but also highlight our safety. You know, I have whānau that actually were on the front line. And we all know people that have been abused just for being themselves. And kare te tikatera, aha kua te aha. It doesn't matter what religion or church, or even if you're just an individual, it's abuse. Abuse is abuse. And I would not wish that upon anybody. But, you know, safe spaces is definitely needed. We're needing events. We're needing kaupapa. We need each other and we need allies. But me mihi ki kōrua. Any last kōrero from you both?
For me, it's, you know, I am loved, and I am grateful in 2025 to be married to a tāne, and to be recognised by the state, to be recognised by my community. There are moments when that is problematic. There are moments when that feels rocky. But in my home and in my heart and in the whānau around me, that I know I'm rock solid in that, and I have no fear. And to anyone listening or watching this afternoon, that the fact that we talked earlier, I was a 10-year-old in 1985. And I remember seeing the homosexual law reform and the fact that if I had understood completely what was going on back then, that I was illegal to be in this space right now back then. The fact that I am legal and I am loved and I am married and I'm connected to my whānau and my community, that is good. And we need to celebrate that. We need to look forward. And it's a rocky road. There are things going on, but you need to find people, you need to find spaces that connect you to what is right, because love is love. And I I am blessed and I am enriched by the human that I am and the human I get to celebrate my life with, and the whānau and community that has the joy to express that with me as well. That's my kōrero.
Well, you know, Naniko, we're Maunga people, right? We're Maunga people. And so, you know, when we hear that whakatauki whaia te tikahurangi ki te tūoku I mehe maunga teitei, we know what that means. We know that we should not bow down to anything greater than our tupuna maunga, ever. And so, you know, that I think is what is really embedded in the kind of understanding that we have as taranaki, you know, that we have a strength that reminds us every day that there are bigger things in the world that we need to bow down to. And they don't include bowing down to homophobes or transphobic or anyone that espouses any level of hatred upon our people. And, you know, one of the things that is, you know, a part of that is that in our mahi, in our research mahi, the thing that, you know, we have all these statistics around what happened and what creates stress and distress for our whānau. But one of the things that really came across was that for takatāpui, if you had a whānau member, if you had someone close to you that was your person, that constantly affirmed you, and I think Glenn just really said that in what he was saying, whānau that constantly affirm you, hapu and iwi that constantly affirm you, that uplift you, that love you irrespective of what else is going on or any other information or misinformation that they're hearing, that actually enabled takatāpui to get through many, many other obstacles. And so my closing, I guess, tonight is actually to our wider whānau hapu and iwi, is that in terms of this context, it is your aroha, it is your manaaki, it is your tiaki, it is your kaha that support takatāpui through contexts of harm. And so be that person, be those people. Don't leave it for takatāpui in the rainbow community to be battling and fighting with these people. It should not be our battle. But that when you're in a context of that kind of depth of aroha, and you feel safe in that context, you can then go into the world in a different way and with a sense of identity that is intact and that can walk in this world irrespective of what else is going on. So I guess my message really is to, you know, to our whānau hapu and iwi, you know, to our families, be the one. You be the one. Tēnā koe, nāneko mō mahi, te pōnei, tēnā koutou e whakarongo mai ana. Kia mātou I tēnei pō.
Tēnā kōrua, mō kōrero, mō tō aroha, tō oranga, hei, tū mai hei pau mō tātou katoa. Anei mātou katoa e mihi ana ki a kōrua, me o kōrua nei mahi, I roto I te hāpuri, I roto I ngā wānau, mō te maunga, mō tātou katoa. Nō reira e te whānau, thank you for joining us tonight on Te Korimako, on our page, Facebook page and our YouTube page. In the comments section, I will be adding in some kōrero, some links. You're most welcome to help yourself and have a look at all those beautiful kōrero that are there, some books, resources, wānau. Let's get educated, let's back each other up. As wahine Māori, as a takatāpui myself, this has been amazing. Hoi anō e te wānau, anei te karakia hei waka tepe pai I tō tātou nei ui. Nō reira, kia uru mai, a au ora, a au ka a au mai, a ki runga, ki raro, ki wa o ki roto, rire au, pai mai rire. Ngā me e.
Kia ora.
Ngā mihi.